And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud host of Beyond the Budget 2025, where they are reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Good evening. Welcome to the program. So much going on in the money world tonight. I don't know how you start your morning, but I imagine you may include at some point, perhaps I'm hoping over a cup of coffee or maybe some green tea or something, a few moments glancing at the news headlines. And you're probably doing that on a news website. And before I go any further, you probably know that I'm conflicted with what I say next. But I'm fascinated by the Competition Commission finding that Google should pay up to 500 million rand, basically in revenue, to media companies that provide you with news, often for free, on news websites. And the point is that these websites, and this is the finding of the Competition Commission, not me, although I happen to align myself with it, that essentially Google is getting more value. There's a value imbalance, is the phrase that James Hobb, the chief economist at the Competition Commission, uses. And he is suggesting that really the problem is that there is a value imbalance. The value of news that Google is getting, the value of that news is worth far more than the value of the traffic that is going to the producers. That's the point that they're making. I find that very interesting. And I mean, it's obviously true. And you know, of course, that media is under all sorts of pressure at the moment. So just a thought tomorrow, when you have your tea or your coffee, that is happening. And there may well be ways for you to get involved in that. And of course, as you know, I am biased. I'm not going to tell you that I'm objective when it comes to this. But certainly, there is something very important in that story, I think, and it's well worth just paying some attention to. You may remember a week ago we spoke to Sikanati Mantshantsha. He's done many things, of course, but I think will go down in history as a fearless journalist, certainly in my book. He's currently working at News 24. And he spoke to us last week about a story involving the Public Investment Corporation and money they'd given to a company called Enable Capital. It was 100 million rand, and now they'd laid criminal charges, and they're clearly big problems with this company. He said at the time that he was expecting to be able to name some of the private sector investors that had also given this company money. 700 million rand seems to have, well, perhaps disappeared through the hands of Enable Capital. Well, today he made good on his promise. And on News 24, he reported that Old Mutual Alternative Investments, Westbrook Partners, Mason Global, and Prescient had together put 700 million rand in. That seems to have disappeared. Ruben Olifant is the person who a criminal charge has now been laid against. It is astonishing that this can happen. And you would like to think that people would investigate, check, recheck, kind of do it all again. And yet, this is now money that seems to have disappeared. I do wonder what's going to happen. At some point, I would like to think the law enforcement authorities are going to catch up with Ruben Olifant, and we'll get a proper kind of understanding of what the story is. But it is just amazing. And the other big story, of course, is around Prosus. They're spending 89 billion rand to buy JustEat.com or JustEatDelivery.com. They're a big European fast food chain. They do what they say on the tin. They deliver food to you. And there's so much competition in this market. But Prosus says that they're going to have innovation. I kind of would like to know what you would want from your food delivery service. I mean, would it be faster, hotter? Would it smell better? Is there something maybe in the packaging? You know, sometimes you have to spend hours getting it out, and it's still kind of in a kind of greasy plastic. Is there something else you would like? I don't know, a free motorbike or something. That's a joke. But from what is it that you would like from the company that is delivering food, hot food, I hope, to your door? Would it be being able to deliver ice cream, which I imagine poses all sorts of technical challenges? But is there something in particular you would like? I mean, maybe you just want it to be faster. Well, we'll find out a bit more about that. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567, and of course voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, confirmation from Sasol today. Its headline earnings for the 6 months to the end of December down by 30%, mainly due, of course, to lower fuel prices that affect them. Also, further impairments, particularly at a Secunda liquid fuels plant. The company also saying there was a decrease in sales volumes as a result of lower production and less demand. The Chief Financial Officer at Sasol is Walt Bruin. So, Walt, good evening to you and thanks for your time. Obviously, you're very vulnerable to international fuel prices. You produce your fuel from coal. Lower oil prices have really hit you quite hard.
Yes, good evening, Stephen, and thanks for having me on your show tonight. Yeah, we are vulnerable to movements in the oil price and obviously also the rand-dollar exchange rate, both of which impacted us negatively in the first half of the year. I think what was important for us is how we responded, and so you would have seen that similarly we looked to reduce our cash fixed costs, which were 1% down year on year, and also on our capital expenditure, which we managed to reduce by 6%. In addition, we have looked at how we hedge the rand oil and the different components that make that up, and we feel that with that risk management in place, it makes us less vulnerable, certainly something that we monitor closely.
You had a big impairment at the Secunda Liquid Fuels facility. You've written down the value of that by 5 billion rand. Why did you feel you had to do that? What drove that decision?
Yeah, so I'm not happy to be impairing that capital, but we have seen it in the previous financial year too, where we've had some impairments on the Secunda Liquid Fuels refinery. I think what's important for you and your listeners to note is Secunda is made up of a number of different cash-generating units, of which the refinery is one component. We also produce chemicals. There we see significant value still in those assets. The impairment was largely due to a lower forecast macroeconomic prices, the oil price being one of them, and also further strengthening of the rand. We are working internally to see how do we improve the future of that liquid fuels refinery and make sure that it generates free cash flow that supports its further investment. We feel confident that we can do that.
Okay, I mean, you're obviously in a difficult environment, and this, in a way, goes straight to the question of the longer-term future of Sasol. You still see a future in this kind of fuel? I mean, obviously, it's going to be a long time before we stop driving diesel and petrol cars in South Africa, but it would seem that gravity's kind of against you, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, some days are better than others, Stephen, I'll be honest. I think the reality is we still produce products that people want and need, and we don't see that changing in the short to medium term. I think the other news that we highlighted today was also an optimization of our emissions reduction roadmap. That's a fancy way of talking about our greenhouse gas emission target, which remains 30% by 2030. What we have adjusted there is not so much the what, it's the how. And in so doing, we've adjusted the levers that we can pull, and that requires less capital and cost. Still achieving the outcome, but more importantly, I think it doesn't require us to turn down Secunda, which at this time in the South African economy, we need more growth, not less. And in so doing, we think we can support the South African economy further by producing more of our products.
Okay, so the Sasol of 20 years from now, I mean, you'll need to be working on that. You have already been working on that. Your chair is someone who knows issues around climate change very well, for example, so you've been positioning yourself already. I mean, what is the Sasol of 2045 doing? So
I think that the two, I think we will have we obviously will still have a strong South African business. We're proudly South African. I think what you'll see is we'll move into different adjacencies, close to our core. So we remain an energy company, and so we're excited. You would have maybe seen that we've announced that we'll be making some more investments in renewable energy. We will continue to see, petrol and diesel, perhaps not in the quantums that we've seen before, but we'll right-size the organization to reflect, that cost structure and be supportive of that. And then I think, moving more internationally, obviously we made a significant investment in Lake Charles, which we've struggled over the years to deliver on. We at least saw, earnings double from our international chemicals in this half of the year, and we continue to see upside there. A lot of those chemicals go into our day-to-day lives and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. So we see a space for both our South African energy business and our international chemicals business in some shape or form going forward.
Walt Bruns, thanks very much indeed. The Chief Financial Officer at Sasol. So many questions to ask, of course, about the longer-term future, how things are going to pan out. No one can predict the future, as I say. Obviously, we're going to be using fossil fuels still for quite some time. They have to come from somewhere, and there's money to be made in that. That's fine. But certainly, things are changing.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, confirmation today, the Prosus Group agreeing to buy the European food delivery chain, Just Eat Delivery.com, for 79 billion rand. It offers shareholders a premium of 49% on its average share price over the last 3 months. It will make it the world's fourth largest food delivery group. You can imagine how much growth there might still be in this sector. Ervin Tu is the President and Chief Investment Officer at the Prosus Group. Ervin, good evening. Thank you for your time once again on The Money Show. What is it about Just Eat that makes it so valuable to you? Why a 49% premium on the price?
Stephen, it's great to be with you and your audience tonight. I would say that the company is attractive to us because it has meaningful market position in significantly large markets in Europe. We don't have a presence in food delivery in Europe to date. We do have a significant portfolio in the rest of the world. And we believe that through the addition of the technology know-how that we've demonstrated at businesses such as our iFood subsidiary in Brazil, we can apply that to the Just Eat takeaway business and improve their performance. So that's why we're interested, Stephen.
You say you want to use your experience to innovate, to drive efficiencies throughout the group. And obviously you have a lot of experience. You have lots of businesses in the sector. I mean, what kind of changes would you be making? Because I think for most of us, there's an app and a person who arrives on a motorbike with my food. What's happening behind the system that you think you can do more competitively?
Well, you say at one level, there's an app and someone who delivers the food. And of course, that's correct. For those of us who run these businesses, though, that interaction that you've just described actually is representative of, 57 different process steps to get there. So how is the app, when you open the app, presented to you? How is the merchant or the restaurant that you find and order from presented to you? Is it consistent with your preferences? How is the menu presented to you? What offers are provided to you at that moment of purchase in terms of a discount or incentive? Or is there no incentive? And how are you, the customer, informed while the order is underway as to the timing of when that order will get to you? Is it consistent? Does it constantly adjust? How accurate is that estimate? And so forth. Is there advertising that's also delivered alongside the order? There are a number of different things that constitute the experience, Stephen, not to name price, of course. That's important to consumers. And so we have in our iFood business, just to give you an example, we've actually used AI to enhance that experience in multiple ways. And I'm not even talking about things like customer support or the route optimization of the courier and so forth. There are many dimensions of the experience which we have improved through the application of technology and AI in iFood in Brazil. And we think that there could be opportunity. We have to get in there to further understand and test whether some of these things will work in the European context in these markets. But that's our hypothesis.
I mean, I presume, in Europe, much more densely populated, certainly their cities than Joburg or Cape Town, for example. I mean, you will probably have a choice of 200 restaurants in that you could get food from in many places. So the discovery, the communication, all of those things become a lot more important than they might in a place that's that doesn't have quite as much choice.
Well, I candidly, I think that perhaps the opposite is true. I mean, in situations where there isn't as much choice, then the other dimensions of the experience matter much more. So when selection is wide, then maybe your satisfaction is informed by what you are able to choose because of that selection. When selection is narrow, then, well, that's not a big driver of your experience. What becomes more important is the incentive you might be provided or not provided, the timeliness of the delivery, all of those other factors, dimensions that I described earlier, perhaps actually are more important, Stephen.
It's fascinating. I mean, there's so much to it between the app and the driver. Europe does have quite strong regulators, and you're growing strongly in this place. Are you expecting any issues there? I mean, perhaps in the competition aspect of this, particularly because while, as you say, you don't have a big sort of European operation, but we can see that Europe does have stronger regulation than you might get in the US, or maybe I should even be as brave as saying more interventionist.
I think your general observation of the state of regulation in Europe relative to other geographies is correct. And we should not underestimate the size of the business that we are acquiring. We don't have heretofore significant businesses in Western Europe, right? We have in the form of OLX, our principally Eastern European classifieds platform, or we have a business called eMag, which is a B2C. It's a traditional e-commerce retailer, but in Western Europe, we don't have anything of significance. So this is a large business. This is a business, Just Eat Takeaway, with 19 billion euros of gross transaction value, and something produces, over 300 million of EBITDA. This is for 2024, I'm quoting. And so it is a business of significance in Western Europe. It will attract regulatory attention, this transaction. And we look forward to engaging with regulators shortly to begin the dialogue to obtain their support for the transaction. And we are confident about that. We have to engage with the regulators to see what concerns they might have.
We're used to, say, an Uber app, for example, that works no matter where you are. You might live in Joburg most of the time. You go to Cape Town, or you go to Bonn, or you go, many, many places. You'll still be able to order and transact on the app. You'll pay a price for it, of course. You'll have to manage currencies, but it'll go through the same credit card. I presume that you're going to be doing something similar, and you'll be doing it already in some markets.
Yeah, actually, the hard work on that has already been accomplished by the Just Eat Takeaway team. They have unified their app across their geographies in Europe, and that's already been done. But there are many other elements of the experience that I alluded to earlier that can be enhanced further with the application of more technology and innovation and AI in particular. So that hard work, actually, what you just described, has been done already. We're grateful for that.
Ervin Tu, thank you very much indeed, President and Chief Investment Officer at the Prosus Group.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Meryl Pick is a portfolio manager at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Meryl, good evening to you. Well, Ervin Tu is very bullish about the deal that will see Prosus buying Just Eat. The share price was down for Prosus, though, quite significantly.
Absolutely, Stephen. Good evening, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, so NASDAQ is down almost 8%, Prosus similarly. Now, bear in mind, Tencent, which is a key driver behind the share price, was down today nearly 4% in Hong Kong. But still, clearly, the holding company down more than Tencent being the underlying asset. So I would infer in that.
Meryl, I'm going to ask you just to move around so that we can strengthen the reception on your line, please, just if we are able to do that.
I can try that.
Okay, we'll just wait a second while Meryl Pick just sorts out the reception on her line. Of course, during periods of intense load shedding, you'll find that cell phone quality often does sort of fall apart from time to time. Does happen and does make it quite difficult, as you might have noticed, to produce a radio show. Let's try. Now, Meryl, I think you're back with us. You're making the point that Prosus was down more than Tencent was.
Correct. So Tencent was down about 4% today in Hong Kong. Close to 4, whereas Naspers and Prosus were down close to 8. So I infer that some of that difference is attributed to the announcement of the Just Eat deal. Why would that be? So I think management has been guiding towards we're going to focus on operating better what we have in the business. And extracting profitability from the non-Tencent assets. So you could look at this M&A as, a deviation from that, although they have also taken care to warn investors that big, chunky M&A is by no means off the table. But when I look at today's market reaction, what the market was hoping for was probably that further big M&A was off the table. It doesn't mean that it's a bad deal in and of itself. They've paid a premium to the recent share price. If you look at this EV/EBITDA, estimates are about 12 times. If you compare that to just tech companies, that's not big. Microsoft is in the 20s, Meta also in the high teens. But if you look at this food delivery industry, I think we're still getting to grips with what exactly are we buying. If you look at the EV/EBITDA multiple of just a pure logistics company like DHL, that is in the mid-single digits. If you look at Bidcorp, which is a service provider into restaurants, they're close to 10. Very great ROEs and great cash flows. That business is in this restaurant sector trading at 10. So what is it about the platform that actually justifies, high multiples? Or is this actually just a logistics company? I think that's what the market grapples with food.
It's very interesting. I mean, I'm fascinated by the sort of the stuff behind it. Meryl, very quickly, if you can, Sasol, essentially, I think just another warning from them today. Their earnings are down 30%. Of kind of how difficult the environment they're in is. I mean, I made the point to their chief financial officer, I think just the way the world is moving, gravity is against them.
Yes, look, I think one has to separate the facts and then what one is paying for the facts or what the market expects. So Sasol, let's first start with that. Sasol is now on a forward-looking 1 year out price to earnings multiple of 2 times. This is easily a record low. So it is being priced like a coal company. Yet it's not entirely a coal company. As Walt pointed out, there's a whole chemicals operation in the US where the cycle is quite depressed and can potentially recover. What I found encouraging in the results is that this time last year, they burnt 6 billion in cash. This year, they burnt 1 billion in cash, with revenue actually down. So that's quite a respectable, the direction of travel for free cash flow is going in the right direction. If you read through some of the finer detail as well, I think there's a pragmatic solution starting to be at least discussed with regards to greenhouse emissions, etc. And I think that's going to involve all the stakeholders in South Africa, including government, to come to the party.
Meryl Peck, thank you very much indeed, Portfolio Manager at the Old Mutual Investment Group.
You're listening to The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth at Beyond the Budget 2025.
Good evening to you. You know the number, of course, 011 8830702 and 021 4460567. You heard the conversation with Prosus a few moments ago, Ervin Tu, talking about what it is that actually goes into how a food delivery app works. All of the things, the advertising. I know app designers, I think, call it discovery. If it was about music, for example, how are you encouraged to discover new music that you haven't listened to before? Discovery in this case would be food you haven't had before from suppliers you haven't used before. But what is it that you would like from your food delivery service that you're not getting at the moment? Would be very interested to hear your view tonight.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, a special cabinet meeting this afternoon, as you can imagine, to discuss the budget. The budget was postponed last week. The DA and other parties in the coalition have said they won't support a VAT increase of 2 percentage points. Intense speculation about what's happening now. It does seem to me, though, sitting from where I sit, that there's very little appetite for making real changes. I was reminded today of a conversation you heard with Colin Coleman last year, the former head of Goldman Sachs, South Africa. He suggested then we needed to make radical changes to our budget, including zero-based budgeting. In other words, you'd start your budget again, essentially. Well, he joins you now, and of course he has a long history in our country. Colin, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us again. I presume you're going to say we need bigger changes. What do we actually need to do in this quite difficult situation that we're in?
Thanks, Stephen. Look, I found the budget debacle somewhat inexplicable because one should have known well ahead of time that we were in a context of low growth and higher expenditure pressures going to have something of a crystallized point where we were going to have to deal with matching effectively balancing income and expenditure pressures And the expenditure side had obviously grown. We have an expenditure envelope of 2.6 trillion rand that was going to be published in the budget that was withdrawn effectively, and a hole of 60 billion rand that they were, I think, irresponsibly suggesting could be filled through a 2% VAT increase. Any VAT increase, even 1%, would have been somewhat eye-catching, but a 2% VAT increase in the context of 40% unemployment and growth below population growth rates seems almost madness to me. And 60 billion out of 2.6 trillion is not that difficult to square away. It's 2.2% of the expenditure envelope. And given the amount of expenditures that I would deem low-impact, wasteful expenditures, one would have thought that well in advance, the finance minister, the treasury, would have been talking to the cabinet about pruning those expenditures and also looking at the investments we make in the form of incentives and rebates to industry like the automotive manufacturing incentive, or the money we give to the road accident fund or to CETAs or things like that, that I would qualify as or deem to be low impact or wasteful expenditures, whereas we should be recycling those expenditures into high impact investments, such as in SARS or in the National Prosecuting Authority or other forms of pro-growth investments. And through that, I believe we would have easily balanced the budget. If you're a corporation, Stephen, I would think it would be very easy to say, we need to balance our books by cutting expenditure by 2.2%. And the last thing one would do is impose a VAT increase, which was clearly signaled by the DA to the Treasury as not acceptable to them. So why put the country in this position that is completely unprecedented? I think it's irresponsible. Now the question is, can the Treasury, in the time remaining, go through a consolidated expenditure review and emerge with 60 billion rand of cuts in the non-essential areas and make some political hard choices? In the longer term, we have to go through the zero-based budgeting exercise to effectively find this 2.2% hole in the budget on an ongoing basis so that we improve the quality of what we're spending money on.
I mean, there are a lot of attractions to a zero-based budget. I mean, there's some things that government spends money on I find hard to understand. But would it lead to major changes? I mean, wouldn't you end up still spending a large proportion of your money, I think correctly, on health, on education, on social grants? I mean, if you were to change the system that currently encourages and incentivizes the motor industry, for example, you would radically change the face of the Eastern Cape. You wouldn't want to do that. I mean, would it lead to that big a change? Is there quite a lot of money you think we wouldn't need to spend if we did it like that, as if we went the route of a zero-based budget?
Look, I think we're talking about on the margins, right? 2.2% of the total expenditure envelope, which is what we're looking for. I think you should be looking more like, what is the 5 to 10% of expenditure cuts that we could engineer that would effectively be recycled into the high impact expenditures with some saving? So yes, I think a proper zero-based budgeting exercise would take, after 30 years of effectively recycling the budget every year from the same base, you would start again and say, what is the most high-impact expenditures that we can engineer through a consensus process that would be a politically driven process from the top. So I think the president would have to authorize the Minister of Finance to say to all departments, tell us what your 5 to 10% least valuable expenditures are, and you have to find them. And where is it that you would want to recycle that expenditure into much higher impact? Can we engineer, for example, technology so that the back office of departments like police, health, education, and so on is made more efficient, so to release funds for front office, teachers, police, educators, and so on and so forth, nurses, so that we can recycle the money into much more effective areas. And the Auditor General, who produces these reports on wasteful expenditures and corrupt expenditures every year, should be part of that process to say, where is it that these expenditures are being inefficient or worse?
I don't know if I sense the political appetite for that, particularly with the coalition, never mind the internal politics of the ANC, I'm afraid. I mean, I think, Colin, as much as my spirit is with you, the body of our politics just may be too weak. The fight would just be too intense.
Well, I think South Africa is getting to a point now where we're at a crossroads. I mean, that's what the budget tells us, the failure to have the budget speech, is that there are some signs of systemic failure. And unless we really get on top of these warning signs, high unemployment, low growth, inability to fix our state-owned enterprises, although there have been some progress in relation to Eskom, we see the cracks with load shedding currently. We are going to have the political will as a nation in order to deal with these problems, and we have to get on top of it. And frankly, the president has the authority to crack the whip and make these political hard choices, or else the country is going to be in further trouble, and we cannot afford that.
Colin Coleman, thank you so much. A distinguished fellow at NZ and, of course, a former partner, former head of Goldman Sachs in South Africa.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, of course, stage 4 load shedding tonight after stage 6 over the weekend. It does now seem that a group of ministers headed by the Mineral and Petroleum Resources, Mr. Gwede Mantashe, will now have to make some tough decisions about electricity tariffs and perhaps smelters. Currently, Eskom says smelters account for around 12% of domestic electricity sales. They get quite a big discount on the electricity they use. That means that you pay more. Chris Yelland, of course, is the energy analyst and managing director at EE Business. Chris, good evening. It's easy to say we should just close the smelters or refuse to subsidize them. I presume there are important reasons why we can't just do that. I mean, they are a big part of our heavy industry.
They are, I suppose. They're not big employers, and they don't make much profit, so they're not, at the moment, a big contributor to the tax, to the fiscus, you might say. But they do contribute towards the balance of payments, and there's some, some advantage in that. But ultimately, we got to decide: are we really a destination any longer for this kind of energy-intensive industry? Is our price of electricity, such that it gives a competitive advantage to these companies? Right now, the regulator is being approached by energy-intensive users, with their begging bowl out, to get subsidies, effectively a subsidized or reduced price of electricity in order to keep their businesses going. These are private businesses. And what it means, as you've rightly pointed out, is that other customers who are not so privileged as to be able to get these sort of handouts have to pay more. We have to pay to keep these private companies going, presumably because they contribute to the balance of payments of South Africa.
There's a quote from News 24 today. It wasn't a current quote, it was a couple of months ago, last year, in fact. Quoting Minister Mantashe is saying that any electricity increase by more than CPI would be criminal, and he would have been speaking before the current NERSA increases were announced. And yet, I'm presuming, I mean, this is a big presumption on my part, that he would support the smelters. What I'm trying to get to is, never mind Mantashe for a moment, I suppose, this is about trade-offs, and aren't tariff prices all about trade-offs? And in a situation that we have now where the tariffs are quite complicated, there's a very large number of them, you need to make sure that Eskom gets enough money to keep going. You need to make sure that electricity doesn't rise by more than people can afford to pay, and we're probably already past that. And and municipalities are going to get less money than they were for electricity because middle-class people are using solar where they can. The point is they're very difficult trade-offs to make, and I don't know if the decision makers are grasping those trade-offs.
I agree with you entirely. It's all very well to say that the price of electricity is too high, we can't put up the price. Really, the solutions have to come from how do we reduce the inefficiency and wastage, within a company like Eskom or a municipality. How do we make it more efficient? How do we restructure the industry, to bring it into a line that allows savings? Where are these savings going to come from? How are we going to achieve them? And one of the ways of doing it, for example, is by restructuring Eskom. I just want to give you an example. Recently, it was uncovered by the Auditor General the extent of ghost vending of prepaid electricity. This is an industry which I estimate to be about 27 billion rand of counterfeit prepayment tokens that is costing Eskom about 27 billion rand a year. That is a kind of wastage or fraud that is taking place. Now, the reason why it's coming to light now is because Eskom is being unbundled into generation, transmission, and distribution. In the amorphous Eskom that existed prior to this, 27 billion rand of loss, as big as that is, gets hidden in this amorphous mass. But by restructuring industry, now you have Eskom distribution, which is a much smaller operation than Eskom generation in terms of its cost structure. Now it is impossible to hide a 27 billion rand hole. And so by restructuring and making things more transparent, one can highlight and then eliminate this kind of wastage. And there is plenty of it. And these are the kind of structural changes that need to be implemented in order to improve the efficiency of the electricity supply industry and the electricity distribution industry.
The electricity expert, Chris Yellen, thank you very much indeed. Just after 7 o'clock on The Money Show.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud host of Beyond the Budget 2025, where they are reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of The Money Show. We'll talk about what on the face of it seems to be a cryptocurrency heist or a hack in a few moments. I suspect, though, that we might find some sort of human failing was involved. We'll find out in just a moment. On that subject, a book called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. We'll speak to the author, Palmi Olsen, in a while. There is so much going on in that space at the moment, and it really is a fascinating look at the sort of race between some of these different groups. And if you want to understand DeepSeek, it won't talk about DeepSeek, obviously, but it'll provide you insights, I suspect, into that as well, because there is so much going on there. And then don't forget, from 7:30 this evening, we'll be speaking to I suppose you would call him now an investigative forensic psychologist, Dr. Gerard Labeskakny, but you probably know him as the person who's got under the skin or into the mind of serial killers. I mean, he's the person who literally interviewed in the course of his professional work Thabo Bester, for example, who, as we know, raped and killed someone. He's done it many, many times. And there is so much to it, but we'll talk about his career. How you get this. Started in the police force, I understand. How you end up specializing. And then, of course, the daily work, what that's like. So looking forward to that conversation as well. Still interested in what you want from your food delivery service. So many questions around discovery, how to find new things to eat, the advertising. And I don't know if you have a view on the long-term future of Sasol as well. We spoke to their chief financial officer a little while ago. I mean, I make the point that, of course, we're going to need fuel, we're going to need gas, we're going to need chemicals for some time to come. And there's a legitimate sort of means to make money there. But I suppose there are still long-term questions about the long-term future of Sasol. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, we're told all the time that cryptocurrency, and this is from people in that space, that cryptocurrency is unhackable, that it can't be stolen from you, that it is always yours, that no matter what happens, you will be able to access it. And there was confirmation over the weekend that hackers stole $1.5 billion from a cryptocurrency exchange the firm the money was stolen from is called Bybit. I think it's based in Dubai. The hackers stole the money from the Ethereum coin digital wallet. Hendrik de Bruin is the head of SADC Security Consulting at Checkpoint Software. Hendrik, good evening. So we're constantly told that cryptocurrencies are incredibly safe. How did something like this happen?
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners. Thank you very much for having me. I think the reality when it comes to the digital world and cybersecurity is that nothing is really unhackable. And that relates to so many factors. It could involve the human element. It could involve the technology itself. But in a nutshell, I believe that nothing is really unhackable.
Okay. You're going to have to explain this to me, and we might have to go back a bit with how cryptocurrencies work. But if I put money into a bank, and I put cash into a bank in the old days, and the cash was stolen, I would presume that that's the bank's problem, not my problem. What I'm trying to get to is this money was stolen from a cryptocurrency wallet called Ethereum. How would you know whose money was stolen and whose money wasn't?
So, that's, I suppose, part of the double-edged sword that is cryptocurrency. Part of the appeal is the, deregulated and anonymous nature through which you can transact with these currencies. But there are also ways and techniques that these transactions, etc., can be tracked. And that's exactly what is taking place in the case of Bybit. They have involved various agencies such as Interpol and various other security analysts to assist in tracking some of these funds. So, yes, it has got an anonymous nature to it, but it is also possible to track it. The main thing is that, when it comes to regulatory frameworks, etc., it is an evolving industry when it comes to cryptocurrency. And if you look at South Africa currently, the main regulatory bodies involved with this would be the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA, and the SA Reserve Bank. However, they still do not offer any guarantee of recovery when it comes to cryptocurrencies. So you can invest, you can save your money in the bank, you do have certain guarantees, but those guarantees are not often the same when it comes to cryptocurrencies.
Okay, so Bybit has said it will refund the money. It's going to have to borrow money to do that, I understand. So it's not in a position to do it twice. So would someone open their account, I presume on their phone, and realize the money had been stolen? Or would Bybit themselves have known that their wallet had been hacked? I mean, I'm presuming maybe a combination of those things.
True. So in this case, it was specifically a transaction from what they call a cold wallet to a hot wallet. So in this case, what is considered a cold wallet is really an offline store of cryptocurrency. That's essentially where they keep the majority of their currency. And this specific hack happened when the transaction was moved from the cold wallet to the hot wallet. And, that's where the money got hijacked or heist. So in this case, although it belongs to individual users, this hack actually occurred on the back end and does not relate specifically to end users, that a specific individual got affected directly through a mobile phone or something to that effect.
Okay, so it's the bank's problem, not the individual's problem.
Well, the cryptocurrency exchange's problem. However, regulatory compliance and those things will dictate exactly what the responsibilities will be.
I'm sure that the reason Bybit is going to make sure that everyone is refunded and go to the extent of taking out a loan to do that, if I understood it correctly, is for the same reason that banks guaranteed credit card transactions online when that kind of commerce first started. Banks, along with many other people, wanted people to be able to buy online. They knew that that would help grow the economy. They knew that that would make them more money. And as a result, they then provided a guarantee that if something went wrong, you would get your money back. And as an easy example, in December last year, I had a large amount of money taken out of my credit card. It turned out so did many other people because, like many other people, we had all subscribed to Disney Plus and there had been a hack, right? I'm presuming that cryptocurrencies will now have to do the same. If there are any problems, if they want to keep faith in the system, they're going to have to make absolutely certain no one loses money.
Correct. I think, firstly, investor sentiment plays a big role when it comes to cryptocurrency, and reputational damage could erode that investor sentiment. So what we saw initially was a dip in Ethereum prices. It dropped almost 4.2%. But due to the immediate intervention by the CEO of Bybit and the way they dealt with communication, etc., they really did a great job of reinsuring investors and people utilizing the platform for transactions in how they deal with it and how they can protect those investments. So, although we saw that initial 4.2% down, the Ethereum going down, it actually stabilized later during the weekend and today.
I'm presuming some cryptocurrencies safer than others?
Well, that very much depends, right? Once again, not just from a cybersecurity perspective, but also from a reputational perspective. We see that Bitcoin was not that negatively affected by this specific hack. But if it was Bitcoin currency that was actually stolen, it might have affected Bitcoin. So it really depends on the circumstances.
Hendrik de Bruin, thank you. Head of SADC Security Consulting at Checkpoint Software. It's a fascinating story. I'm very, very intrigued to see how this is going to evolve.
The Money Show.
Business Books.
Well, if there's one thing we talk about as much as cryptocurrencies on this show, it is artificial intelligence. And there's a fascinating new book. It's called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. It's by Parmi Olsen. Parmi is also, of course, a Wall Street Journal or a journalist, written other books about things related to tech and the world in which we live. Parmi, good day to you, and thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It's a hugely timely book. I mean, we've all been talking about DeepSeek. We've all been talking about artificial intelligence. And you start the book by saying, it's a fascinating way to start a book, by saying you're not offended if someone asks if this book is written by a human. And it reminds us just how much has changed since ChatGPT was first sort of introduced to the mass public.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, by the way. I put that in because it's funny, in just the last few weeks, there was, I don't know if you saw the headline that came out from the publishing industry, that some publishers are now putting certified human written on some of their books, just to make it clear to potential readers that it has not been AI generated, but it has come from a human. I mean, already on Amazon, there are so many books now that are being sold that are summaries. I've just been reading about this, that are summaries of other books that are written by humans. And these are, instead of Cliff Notes, you can get an AI generated summary book of other books, and those are kind of selling pretty well on Amazon. So it is crazy that in just the last 2 years, a lot has changed already, whether it's in some areas, not in all areas, but I think particularly in things like publishing, in marketing, in education. I think teachers and head teachers of schools have really had to just rethink how they assign homework to students. This generative AI boom that was sparked by ChatGPT and OpenAI 2 years ago has just seeped into so many different areas of life, almost in the similar way to how the internet just transformed the economies and the way we live our lives, culture and society.
You spent some time looking at some of the personalities involved, the people who actually did. What kind of person was involved in this? I mean, I sort of have a sense of them in my head as a kind of, later 2000s version of Bill Gates. I mean, obviously that's not entirely accurate.
Yes. Well, the history of artificial intelligence has many important scientists and business leaders, but for the book Supremacy, I wanted to focus on who I think are the two most important builders and entrepreneurs in AI today, and they are two people. One is Sam Altman, who is the co-founder of OpenAI and its current CEO, and the guy pretty much responsible for ChatGPT. And the other one is perhaps lesser known. His name is Demis Hassabis. He's the founder of Google DeepMind, which is the AI lab of Google, and now runs all the AI work at Google. And these two men were essentially chasing the same thing. Behind ChatGPT has been this race to build what's known as artificial general intelligence. This is this threshold where you have AI that is cognitively superior to humans. So it's smarter than us. And both these men were trying to build that because they believed that when we reached AGI, when someone eventually built it, and they hoped it would be them, that would be a technology that could solve all sorts of intractable human problems, like climate change or curing diseases like cancer, or just bring abundant wealth to everyone. They had these very humanitarian, almost utopian visions for what this form of AI could do. So I wanted to write about that journey, and also how in this kind of inevitable turn of events, both men ended up helping to extend the wealth and power of large tech companies instead of reaching that utopian goal. That all those humanitarian, those altruistic visions of AGI have kind of gone to the wayside a little bit. And that's kind of the behind the scenes story of the AI boom that we're experiencing today, is this huge accrual of benefits, of financial benefits, to just a few very, very powerful and increasingly large tech companies.
So, I mean, obviously, I presume since the book was published, DeepSeek has come out. Does that upend the way you see it at all? Does it really change it very much? I mean, do you believe $6 million?
A little bit. Yeah. And I love that you brought that up, because since the book came out, people have asked me, and the book came out kind of in September of last year, and I actually handed it in to my publisher in early 2024. And I'd been saying to people that since then I wouldn't update it. It's pretty much, what the story is there, and it still kind of is current, except for DeepSeek. And I think when DeepSeek came out just a few weeks ago, that has really raised a question about this concentration of power in AI, that the guaranteed winners of this AI race are going to be just these huge companies. I think it's not. I still think that ultimately these companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, the biggest tech companies, are going to be the winners and are going to have ultimate supremacy when it comes to AI. But I think there's a possibility now that, and DeepSeek has shown that there could be innovation that comes from smaller sources, and from other countries, not necessarily from Silicon Valley. It could come from China. It has upended this notion that America is the innovator, Europe is the regulator, and China is the imitator. And in this case, China has really innovated, and the America is imitating, because DeepSeek has put their secret sauce. Well, it's not secret. They put their blueprints for R1, their AI model, on the internet. And you can be sure that engineers at Meta and Google are scrabbling to try and replicate it and make efficient models in the same way.
So, I mean, living in Johannesburg, South Africa, have a lot of reasons to fear kind of, tech supremacy. I mean, you worry that they're going to control this, they're going to control that. On balance, though, Google has made my life infinitely better. It's not just the search engine, it's the fact that it powers the cell phone that I use, because I don't belong to the other ones. All of those things. Is it going to be the same with AI, or is there reason to be quite a lot more scared?
Yeah, I think it will be. I think that's a really interesting point that you raised, that the supremacy of tech companies can seem bad, but actually it has brought a lot of convenience to us as consumers and to businesses. And so I think it really is a mixed bag. And I don't think when people talk about AI as being a threat to civilization, I try to look at it in a more nuanced way, in that in the conveniences that we get, we'll simply pay a price. And so when you look at the conveniences you get from Google, or let's take Amazon, incredibly convenient for consumers to get things delivered to them the next day. But what has that done for businesses, for independent retailers and e-commerce companies, and all the companies that Amazon has copied to get where it is today, or has acquired, or steamrolled over? What is the price that we've paid, again, for social media? It's very convenient to be able to scroll through X or Facebook or Instagram and get to get entertainment from those systems, but have they actually helped human connection, or have they eroded many of the ways that we relate to one another, face-to-face, telephone calls? So I think the things that we see as being beneficial to us from technology, the conveniences, do come with a price, often with just very abstract and difficult to quantify things like human values. And I see a similar price being paid with AI on things like our critical thinking skills. I mean, just think of the number of students and professional workers who are just automatically now outsourcing their writing, their idea generation to AI models. So there's that. There's also maybe our imagination, our creative skills. So yeah, I think, I don't see AI as being this big bad thing that's going to go rogue and kill us all, although some people do legitimately worry about that. I see this more as a slow erosion of some of the values that make us human. And I just see that as inevitable. It's not an obvious quantifiable change, but it is a change that will happen to us over time.
Palmy Olsen, Verified Human, thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate the time. The author of the book, Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. Very, very thought-provoking. Lots of insights that I think are going to really predict in some ways the future that is coming our way.
7:02. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, it's interesting to look at different careers and different things people can do to make their money. And there are not many people who've managed to make a career out of literally getting under the skin, unfortunate metaphor, getting into the brains or into the heads of serial killers, of people who've committed the most violent and most awful crimes. And one person who has is Dr. Gerard Labuschagne. He's an investigative forensic psychologist. I'm fairly certain you'll have heard him at some point. You'll have seen him. He gives expert testimony, does all sorts of things in this space. And he's in our studio now. We'll try and get into his brain. Gerard, good evening. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming through.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. Hi to all the listeners.
So, I mean, we know you as the person who spoke to Thabo Bester, was the person who spoke to this serial killer or that serial killer, and helped to actually come up with the definition, the diagnosis of that. Was that something you always wanted to do?
No,
I mean, were you growing up thinking, I want to know what's going on in here?
No, ironically, if you read my books, you'll hear about this, but I nearly failed matric, to be honest with you. I had probably the most embarrassing marks on the planet. Didn't know what I wanted to do. In those days, you still got drafted into the army once you finished high school. Fortunate enough to do the 1 year stint. And in that time, I kind of, people told me a bit more about psychology. I didn't even know the difference between psychology and psychiatry. The one you took a medicine route, and I thought that's the only way. And so no, because I knew I wouldn't get into medicine with my marks. And then actually my mother said to me, no, but psychology is a different method. And I got in because University of Pretoria was doing an experiment to see if people who didn't perform well academically but did well on aptitude tests, was that a better predictor of success than your pure matric results?
Sure.
So I actually got into university through an experiment, a psychological experiment. And I guess 6 degrees later, I proved that, one of the people who proved that theory right, that school results don't always predict your future career or future capabilities. And So yeah, but I thought I was going to be doing normal psychology, opening up private practice, listening to bored housewives, etc. Always had an interest in the crime stuff, like I think many people do. And I did my master's, which was part of your qualification. My dissertation was actually interviewing serial motorists, but just purely because I thought that's interesting. But not thinking I'm going to end up working in the field. And then just kind of a year or two later, worked at Vescopies for 3 years. Did my PhD while I was there, and I thought the easiest way to get a PhD is to continue what you were doing with your master's. So went back and interviewed serial murderers again. And then I knew that there was one person doing this work, which was Mickey Pistorius, which I think many of us have heard of. And I knew she'd resigned, and I think in about 2000. And I always said, well, if that comes available, I'll apply for it because it will be interesting. And I'll maybe go do that for 2 years and then go on to the university. And the post came open. I got it. And I think within the first week, I realized that this is where I wanted to be.
There's your calling.
And I was there for 14 and a half years, so I must have liked it.
I have this idea in my head. I mean, obviously it's from fiction and it's from, Silence of the Sheep or whatever that movie was called. And that there would be a lot of competition for a job like that because it must be so fundamentally interesting because it's so abnormal and thankfully incredibly rare, please nod, that actually there would be a lot of people who would be, studying what you'd studied who wanted to do that. But was that the case?
Not really, because back then we're talking early, when I was studying was late sort of 90s, doing what I was doing. And there wasn't a lot of people, even till today, you can't really study it. There's no forensic psychology qualification. You can't really learn to do this work until you're in the police. So definitely there's been a massive increase, I would say, over the past 10 years in people wanting to get into the world of crime, criminology, doing this kind of work, more so than when I got the job. So I definitely think if you look at the explosion in true crime podcasts and YouTube channels, there's just so much more interest in it nowadays, generally in the books that are out there. And people writing South African stories, but also South African true crime stuff has really just exploded. But yet there's still not a lot of ways you can go study this kind of thing. So the interest is there, but the academia isn't sort of, matching that interest, to be honest with you. And there aren't really lots of jobs. As a profiler, you can only really do it back in my old unit in the police. The police aren't going to hire a private person. I mean, when I left, the police have never hired me to do any work for them afterwards. So there isn't really the market for the occupation. There's massive interest, but there's no real place to go and work doing the job.
It's interesting that, so you were at Vescopies and then you went into the police.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? Because on one level, I have this idea of you now having to do push-ups every day, which I'm hoping wasn't true. But you had all of these qualifications already. Why was it the police that you had to do that in?
Well, like I said, that's the only place you could do this work. I guess, I'd been a civil servant, so I guess I'm just going from one civil servant agency to another. It's not like I was in private practice making a fortune and then left that to go. Because, in the police, I didn't get paid any more than anybody else in my rank. So if you had a colonel, when I joined, I was a colonel, who had a matric, I was getting paid the exact same throughout my career. I didn't get paid anything different for having 6 degrees and an experience I had. And it was just fascinating. I thought this will be a fascinating work to do. And it was truly, I think, the most exciting 14 and a half years of my life. I think the last 2 I was tired and I wanted to leave. They always say you've left the job long before you've left the job.
Yeah.
You leave the job. But it was phenomenal. It was really like, honestly, it was almost the closest you could probably get to the Hollywood image of a profiler. We would be out on crime scenes. We would be interviewing suspects. We'd be flying helicopters, going on arrests, which is typically not actually what profilers do in the real world. They're very much behind the scenes reading, in their offices on a computer. We were kind of really doing exciting stuff because we were employed not just as civilians, we were employed in terms of the Police Act. So we got a rank, we got a gun. You had your basic training shortened compared to other policemen who were joining. And you were out there literally in the thick of it, which was fascinating. All these big cases, you were like in the middle of them, which was really exciting and fun. And I loved working with my fellow policemen. And I always say the smartest people I've ever met were like fellow detectives who might have, some of them, the older ones, didn't finish high school. Yeah. But there's phenomenal intelligence to be able to go from a dead body that you don't even know who this is to solving the case, getting the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt and proving that in front of a judge. And that's just a level of intelligence that, it's phenomenal to have worked with those kind of people. And it was really great. And it was just a lot of fun, to be honest with you. We just had a lot of great times in the cops.
It's interesting because we have this idea that they're just no detectives, and the numbers sort of say that.
Yeah, look, I think that's why we don't have such great results nowadays. It's because it is such an intelligent type of job to get things. It's not just about making an arrest. I can arrest you right now for anything. Yeah. But am I going to be able to prove that in court or get a prosecutor to charge you? Probably not. Well, I hope not. So it's really an intelligent, and it's painstaking, and it's very much an administrative thing. Is this document properly done? Is your chain of evidence correct? When you submitted this exhibit to forensics, do you have all that proof of who handled that exhibit up until that point? And because it is really intelligent and time-consuming and admin-heavy, if you don't do that properly, you will not be able to prove a case in court. So yes, we have a massive shortage of detectives, which means you have detectives with the station detectives who will have like 120 dockets, and the 4 of them are sharing a car. That's insanity. We don't have murder units. Yeah. Why not? So we'll have one or 2 detectives at your local police station who'll be doing all unnatural deaths. That's a suicide. That's someone who fell off the roof and died. That's a car accident. That's a murder. And we have 1 or 2 detectives with that station also probably sharing the same car with the 20, 30 dockets, where that's insanity if you look at the rates overseas.
The economic cost of that must just be immense, because that means that these are never solved, and it's an obvious place to invest.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I correct, our last solving rates stats on murders were about 10 to 12%.
10 to 12%, yeah.
It's really, and overseas, again, I'll not say that overseas is better, but like in the UK, it's like 80 to 90%, sadly. And that's not the cops' fault, it's resources, to be honest with you.
When you were out in the field and you were under the Police Act, so you're a police officer, you have the power of arrest, did that give you insights that other profilers sitting in the office wouldn't have had?
Absolutely. So if I look at the UK, which has got a really good profiling unit, they're not based in the police. They're based in the Home Office. So they weren't allowed to go to crime scenes. They weren't allowed to be participating in interviews. They couldn't go to an autopsy. So they're very often kept away from the stuff, the information that you really need to have direct access to understand and to be able to properly give your input. Even the FBI, their profiling unit, they were very rarely at a crime scene because they were based just outside of Quantico. They had to be invited by the local police into a case. It's not this pitch up and we're taking it over kind of stuff. And as a result of that, they're usually there like after the fact. They weren't actually at the crime scene. So we definitely had some setup here that was to our advantage for how we would operate. We would, as we said, national unit, so we could literally, anywhere in the country, we could stick our noses into cases. We didn't have to be invited. And because we were training detectives, they would call us and say, we've got this scene, can you come out? And if it's close by, we can get there. So we definitely had a different way of working that was to our advantage, which you don't often see even for profilers in other parts of the world.
So there are lots of different things that happen. I know you did some hostage negotiations, which must be incredibly stressful. And you obviously trying to get, and I think of that now because there's such a surge in kidnappings. And I'm not sure why. I mean, the various theories advanced. I don't know if we know, but there does seem to be, I don't know, cash or something. But that moment where you're negotiating with someone who's under intense pressure themselves, I'm talking about the hostage taker now. They have a gun. You don't even know what they have. They have a child or someone involved. I mean, that must be incredibly stressful.
Yeah, it's a massive responsibility. Very stressful, obviously. And, the types of things we're working on, it's a profitable industry, sadly to say. We're talking like 40 to 50 million is a very common demand.
Sure.
And very often they're getting close to that amount. So it's high returns, low risk if you're a professional who knows how to do it. So I think what we saw was these groups operating in Mozambique and other parts of our surrounding countries that felt the time's right. And I think that sadly partly part of that is because they felt the police was not able to. They don't have the technology. It's highly technology focused. And that you're talking to someone who's probably sitting in Pakistan who is not the person who actually who grabbed the person. And that group isn't going to be the people who are actually sitting watching the person.
Sure.
There's no contact between. So and they're using, WhatsApp without a SIM card on the phone. There's a lot of technology behind it. And we just don't have the capabilities to crack that from an investigation point of view. And the biggest struggle was to say to families, you need to focus on the negotiations because you're probably not going to get this person back through an investigation. Not saying don't try, but 99% of these things are resolved through the negotiation process, and you will get your person back safely. For your professional groups, now we've seen a lot of lower chancers who think, this sounds like a good idea, and they will be not as experienced. They make me more nervous because they're not as professional. They will ask for a cash drop-off, which is always a big risk, whereas the other guys, your money is leaving the country, not even through the banking system. It's the Hawala system, which money is moved without moving to, Dubai. So tracing the money forget that from the bat. So it's technologically focused, and as I said, unfortunately, our cops are not technologically advanced, and I don't think they're really investing in understanding how these things work and interacting with our foreign agencies who are dealing with these things.
So when you're negotiating with someone, who's got the power of life or death over someone, do you try and understand them? Do you try and make friends with them? I mean, that's what the movies say. Do you do something else? I mean, how do you approach it?
Well, I obviously don't give away secrets, but for these guys, it's purely a financial transaction.
Yeah.
They know what the guy's worth. They're not going to grab a stranger off the streets and say, let's see if we can get 20 million out of these people. They know exactly who they've got. They know exactly how much money they can afford to pay. So you coming pleading poverty or trying to be their buddy or pleading to their soft side, they don't care. This is a sausage factory. They've got 3 more lined up, and once your guy's out, they've got the next one probably already taken. And they know what they're doing. They're probably 10 times more professional than the cops in how to do this. And if you've got a good private negotiator, you're probably hopefully as professional as they are. And they know what they want, and it's really they will keep you for 4 months, 5 months if they know that the family can afford to pay what they want.
Sure.
They're not worried about time. They're not anxious about we've got to get this done by tomorrow.
Yeah.
The little ones are. They're pressured because they're not set up for this process of hanging on to someone for so long.
We're speaking to Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, the investigative forensic psychologist tonight. His career, how he makes his money on The Money Show.
You're listening to The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth at Beyond the Budget 2025.
Speaking to Dr. Gerard Labuschagne tonight, the investigative forensic psychologist, someone who's, I suppose, made his living, if I can call it that, out of dealing with serial killers largely. Gerard, this is a strange question. Do the serial killers that you've dealt with, that you've spoken to, that you've been involved in the convictions of, do they kind of stay with you, if you know what I mean? I mean, maybe I've just read too many novels, but I mean, do they kind of lurk, if I can put it like that?
I don't think in a post-traumatic kind of way. There's one that actually, before we started the show, he was trying to get hold of me, phones me from prison every now and then. Was one of the guys who was part of my original research back in the mid-90s that I've just sort of, I guess, kept contact with over the years, and he every now and then phones me from prison. But the other ones, I think when I left the police, I kind of also was tired of crime. So I spent a couple of years just trying not to do anything to do with crime. I've kind of slowly worked a little bit back into it in the past couple of years, doing sort of, testifying in court in criminal cases, etc. And I think also when I wrote the 2 books, that was also part of me putting it out on paper. The stories are there, some of them, not obviously all of them. And kind of that also helped me, like, if you want to read about it, the books are there, with those stories, etc. So, I was very fortunate. I think it impacted in other ways on me, but I don't think I had the sort of classical PTSD.
Yeah.
I think it just was a level of work stress that just became, too much and just never ending.
And I suppose as a psychologist, you do therapy yourself, don't you? I mean, don't all psychologists... No.
Probably should have, but no.
There's the police for you.
Yeah.
So you were in the police for quite a long time. You did all of this work, and I've noticed there are quite a lot of people, and I can sort of put names to them, I won't necessarily hear, who've gone and worked in government for a time in some way. Can be for a regulator, it can be for some service. And then they go into the private sector. And I mean, there's a phrase for it even, people call it doing their national service. And they don't mean what it used to be and what it used to entail, but they mean doing something for the good of the country and then going into private service. And the benefit of that for them, and you see it in the States too, is people will start off as a prosecutor because they need to learn how to become a defender, a defense counsel. But it really teaches you how the country works, doesn't it? It shows you what society is in a way that nothing else can.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was very proud of the fact that about 18 years of my life was working for government, in the health department and then mostly then in the police. And I really kind of, I really enjoyed the fact that I was helping, the poorest of the poor, whether it was people admitted to the hospital or in the police. You go into the middle of nowhere in the Northern Cape in some informal settlement and you're helping some poor woman who lost a family member or had been the victim of a sexual crime. They have no idea who you are. And you're kind of giving this really international level service. And they don't know that. And that was really just, I found that very rewarding. I mean, yes, there were times when I thought, my colleagues were studying with me only like 5 times more than I am.
Yeah.
But that was just more frustrating from the point of view that I knew there were people doing such an important service who really get paid peanuts. And we really don't pay our firefighters, our soldiers, our policemen teachers, nurses, we just don't pay them very well in South Africa, which I think that's a bigger crime. But I just found it really rewarding until I just kind of was tired of doing it.
No, well, I mean, I think it must take a heavy toll. There's such a kind of wave of violent crime after the pandemic, and I often wondered if one of the reasons for it may be psychological in some way. The lockdown, the inability to work, the feeling of impotence for men that comes with that you can't earn. Do you think there's something in that?
I think so. I think we might only realize it in a couple of years' time when we look back on all the stats over an extended period of time. But yeah, I mean, it was obviously an interesting time to live through, to see how crime changed. I mean, obviously you lock people down and suddenly a whole bunch of violent crime disappears. Even just the fact that there's still the same amount of firearms out there, but from day one to lockdown, suddenly you were having a drop in crime. So really control people's behavior and you control crime. So, but I think it'll take time for us to see the overall stats as to how this really impacted upon us.
When I ask you these questions, your face lights up. You still kind of love psychology, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I still find it all fascinating, to be honest with you. And like I said, I slowly crept back into doing some criminal expert witness work in criminal cases. But for a number of years, probably for 4 or 5 years, like I didn't want anything to do with anything crime related, to be honest with you.
Dr. Gerard Lebuskakny, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The investigative forensic psychologist.
You're listening to The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth at Beyond the Budget 2025.
Well, from forensic psychologists, serial killers and money, there's a joke there somewhere, I know. Time for us to leave, I'm afraid. We'll be back tomorrow. Good evening, it's 8 o'clock.